On episode 10 of the Busy Aviation podcast, and who'd have thought that we'd get to episode 10, I welcome Paul Dickens, an aviation psychologist from Core Aviation Psychology. And we're going to talk about all things mental health and how mental well-being affects us both as commercial and leisure pilots. Welcome, Paul, to the Busy Aviation podcast. It's awesome to have you join me today to talk a little bit about aviation psychology. Before we get started, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became an aviation psychologist?
How long have we got?
Well, we've got all night.
It's a long story. I actually almost have to go right back to the beginning because when I was applying to university, one of the things I wanted to do was get into psychology in organizations for various reasons. And I went to university in Exeter, but while I was there, I actually got influenced by one of the lecturers who was a clinical psychologist. And he kind of sort of said, oh, no, that's what you want to do. Go into clinical psychology. So that's what I did. I got a place on the clinical psychology course in Glasgow University, moved to Scotland, where I've stayed ever since, and became a clinical psychologist, which I still am, a registered clinical psychologist. And I started working in the NHS, nothing to do with aviation at all. So worked through in the NHS, got myself to the exalted heights of consultant clinical psychologist, advisor to the Scottish government on clinical psychology, all sorts of weird and wonderful things. But at the same time, what I'd been doing is also doing in my own time some consulting work. And I kind of reached a decision point where I thought, actually, what I would prefer to do is move out of the NHS for various reasons and go into consulting. I did that, and I joined a firm of organizational psychologists who are mainly, like me, clinical psychologists. It so happened that one of their major clients was British Aerospace. So I found myself quite quickly working probably 60% of my time in the aviation manufacturing environment. And I loved it. I actually really enjoyed working with it. I got to work with Airbus. I got to work with the really exciting bits was Eurofighter over in Germany. Panavia, who obviously were the body that looked after Tornado. Worked quite a lot with British Aerospace commercial aircraft when they had that, which certainly eventually disappeared, and also with British Aerospace military aircraft. They become BAE systems and so on, but a good deal of my time was then taken up in aviation manufacturing. I left that company, set up a company on my own with some sort of backing from another firm. And it kind of, the aviation bit fell away a little bit because a lot of the clients I was working there were actually more oil and gas. However, a little bit later on, a group of colleagues and myself bought out that company and formed Core Business Psychology. And I was sitting one day in Core Business Psychology, and the phone went, and it was somebody I knew from occupational psychology who said to me, do you know anything about helicopters? And I said, well, I know a little bit about aviation. And she said, but you know a lot about assessment, don't you? I said, oh, yes, I've kind of specialized right the way through my career in psychological assessment. She said, well, there's this company in Aberdeen that's got helicopters that are looking for a psychologist to assess pilots. So I said, I could probably do that. And that was the start of it. So I sort of ended up in Aberdeen, as you probably know, with one of the major offshore operators who have had a policy for a long time of putting all pilots through quite an in-depth psychological assessment. And likewise, they also put engineers through, which is fairly unique. And it's just grown from there. From one client, it is now probably in the region of 30. All four major offshore operators, UK SAR, Irish SAR, a good number of the onshore helicopter operators. But the other thing that's happened in the last probably 3 years is my work has shifted quite significantly into fixed wing operation. And now probably I think 60% of my work is with fixed wing operators, which vary from one in Sweden that has one aircraft and two pilots, through to one in the UK that has 1,400 plus pilots, and everything in between, and covers the real gamut of stuff from scheduled airlines through to business jet operators, charter operators. So a real range of things. And, that's one of the things that really interests me, is the range of stuff I do. So that long convoluted explanation is how I got to be doing what I do just now.
Yeah, that's quite interesting, and I've never heard you explain it all the way through. I've never actually asked you before how you actually got, and particularly in the offshore world, which is a little bit niche. But as you say now, you're covering a lot of fixed wing as well. And I take myself back to the start of my career, and in the RAF, and there wasn't psychology as such. I mean, there was aptitude testing. Was there psychology? Probably not on a formal basis, but it's now really expanded, and you've probably hinted a little bit there about the increase in the interest. We tend to follow up in the helicopter world, but in the fixed wing world, what has caused for this expansion of companies wanting to know, one, before they employ somebody, what kind of personality they may or may not get, and two, I think actually once pilots are employed, there has been an expansion of interest in psychology and mental health. What is there anything particular that's caused that?
I think actually it's always been there. I mean, if you go back to the start of aviation psychology, was actually not that long after the Wright brothers, surprisingly enough. Because certainly during the First World War, it was becoming evident that you couldn't just take somebody who was an officer and put them in an aircraft and hope they could do the job, that you actually had to have some sort of selection process. So actually psychological assessment started at the same time as it was growing as a body of knowledge in the general population. It grew as a body of knowledge in aviation as well. And that continued. It was given another impetus by the Second World War. And I often say to pilots, one of the tests I use still to this day was developed for selection of bomber crews during the Second World War. And another one I used was actually developed for the Luftwaffe in the 1930s for the selection of fighter pilots. So it gave a big impetus to assessment. And that continued. And of course, after the first and second, certainly after the Second World War, most of the commercial operators then began the process of putting this in place. And aviation psychology has been around since that time in my field, which is assessment. It's also been around in the field, another part of aviation psychology, which is the link between the human and the machine. So the human interface, the human factors bit. And that is still a very big component. And it's no surprise that a large number of aviation psychologists are actually employed by the likes of Boeing and Airbus particularly, because they look at this, the whole area of cockpit design, layout. That has been a continuing area. So I think it's always been around. It's been given a big push by legislation. As you well know, there is now legislation in Europe that all pilots have to go, or commercial pilots have to go through psychological assessment prior to commencing line operations. So obviously that's put a big emphasis, because a number of operators were already doing this. Lufthansa, KLM have had armies of psychologists. Emirates have done this for a long time. But other operators have suddenly thought, we've got to do something about this. And then when they've looked at the potential suppliers of aviation psychologists, there aren't that many of us. So it's given an impetus to us as a profession to do something about that, because obviously there are, because it's mandated in Europe, there are some countries that do not have any aviation psychologists at all. The UK don't have very many. Now, the legislation on assessment isn't in the UK, didn't roll over with Brexit, but there are very few of us. I think there's probably at the moment accredited aviation psychologists in the UK. There's probably about 8,
Okay.
not all of whom actually practice. And the people who have my qualification, which is a clinical qualification, which allows us to look a bit more in depth at individuals, there's only 2 of us. And the other guy isn't here.
Okay. No, that's interesting, and I didn't realize it went back so far. Because for me, it's still reasonably new in my commercial role, but we're seeing it, as you mentioned now. It would have been in legislation, certainly for pre-employment testing. It was one of those things that fell on the wayside as we rolled out of EASA into standalone, but it will come into legislation, as you say. In my sphere of experience, we're all doing it. We're all doing it now.
I think what seems to have happened is CAA are saying very clearly it is an operator decision, and many operators have taken the decision that they're going to do this anyway because they're aware of the legislation in Europe. So, for example, you get people like Logan there who are flying code share with KLM and other European partners. They're really saying we have to do this because of the code share agreement. So it's going to happen anyway, I think, even though it's not going to be mandated. And my experience is some of the regulators in Europe are being particularly rigorous about it. I seem to spend most of my time doing assessments from operators in Malta because the Maltese regulator is feeling the collars of operators to make sure they're doing it.
Yeah. Okay. And obviously, in most people's minds as well will be the German wings incident, which obviously precipitated a lot more of an interest, particularly from EASA, into psychology. Yes. Do you think, in some respects, and for those who don't know, the German wings incident, and Paul, you will have far more detail and knowledge on this than me, but was an incident where I won't name the airline, but an aircraft was basically presumed to have been flown into the ground by a co-pilot who had actually known psychological and mental health issues, obviously resulting in the death of all the crew and all the passengers. And at that time, EASA reacted quite quickly. Do you think in some respects, and please fill in the details on that, but do you think in some respects that there may have been a slight knee-jerk reaction to that, or do you think it was required?
Yeah, I think it was. I think it was a fairly, the history of it obviously is that there was a task force. The task force, I'm not quite sure why, came up with this. One of the recommendations is there should be or mandated psychological assessment. And many of us in the psychological field said things like, you will not stop another German wings by assessing every single pilot, because you don't know what will happen between the point of assessment and the point of the action. And I always say I could see somebody tomorrow and they'll be perfectly fine. But something might happen in their life that triggers something 3 or 4 years down the line. I think what it can do is pick up people where there is some underlying propensity and difficulty. And in my practice, I have actually found some. People say to me, how many people do you fail on psychology? Well,
that was going to be a question.
And I failed one not very long ago. And the thing at the back of my mind was something that was said to me by a mutual colleague of both of ours, which was, when you're doing these assessments, just think, do you want to be sitting in the seat next to this guy flying that aircraft? And if the answer to that is no, then you definitely have to fail them. And so, there's always things like that at the back of your mind. But I think you're right. I think the Germanwings was a bit of a knee-jerk reaction. It didn't have a lot of research underpinning it that was robust. I think it did some very important things in strengthening the role of support programs, which we might talk about in a minute. But I think along the line of psychological assessment, it really didn't need to go down that route, and that is why the CAA is not mandating it. They don't think it's the way to go. FAA have also not mandated it, and FAA have said quite strongly they're not going down that route either. So it is going to be purely an EASA thing that pilots have to go through the assessment process. I think I can pick out people who are difficult, but who may not necessarily then go on to, fly an aircraft into a mountain. But that's a different issue altogether. I think
it's relevant as well, and it's sometimes quite hard to pick up an interview a little bit like the psychological assessments, a bit an MOT, and people, it's good for the day that it was done. But a lot of people, aren't themselves at interview or behave themselves at interview. But the interesting point you raised there is that, do I want to sit next to this person? And now, okay, for my profession, that could be, it could be for 6 or 7 hours.
Sure.
But if in the airlines, that could be for 15 hours.
Well, exactly.
And you really want to have the kind of person that you do want to sit next to and get on with for that length of time. And in some respects, that's probably a more subtle benefit of the system, more than probably picking out people who are going to be deeply unsuitable, I would imagine. Because I would imagine that even before they get to someone like yourself, maybe the training system may have filtered some people out that are unsuitable. Yeah, possibly. No, I have to be careful what I say, because I don't want to break any confidences, but I've certainly seen the results of some of your assessments, and I've been able now to compare them to the people that they were done for. And it's quite interesting. You can pick out traits, and that's why I've never let you do it on me.
I do have a hotline to the CAA if necessary. but yeah, I think there's a number of issues. One is, can you pick out people who are pilots who are likely to take their life with an aircraft? The answer to that is possibly not. You could pick out the very obvious things. Absolutely, any clinician would be able to, their antennae would go up straight away. And you can pick that out. But actually, we know the sort of incidences of pilot suicide by aircraft are absolutely infinitesimally small. I think I've got a list of them somewhere. And interestingly, I think there's never been one with a rotary wing aircraft. There has been suicide in association. There was a Belgian pilot who sort of departed the cockpit 2 or 3 years back, and the guy in the left-hand seat looked over and he was gone. He jumped out. But that's few and far between. But you could pick out those sort of issues and people who potentially there's a fundamental issue. But it's the more subtle things that are more difficult, and the subtle things are, how do you get on with your colleagues? It's a CRM. The crew resource management issues. How well are you going to work in a crew? It's particularly when I go into the search and rescue field, it's, how well are people going to be able to work with that sort of multidisciplinary crew, which is a very different question than are they going to take their life by an aircraft. So it's quite a subtle thing in some ways, and that's why I think certainly I get used, because of the clinical background of being able to maybe pick some of these things out. The other factor in it is possible to pick out people who have a propensity for unsafe operations.
Okay.
which you might not see until they're actually in line operations. And we know that there is a personality trait called conscientiousness. And there is a very direct link between that and safety in aviation. People who are low in conscientiousness have an increased number of safety-related incidents. So it is something I look for. And it's one of the things where I would say, maybe not take this person on because they're not at the level I would associate with a safe pilot. So what you're looking for there are safe behaviors.
So that conscientiousness, is that in the true sense of the word then? So if someone who's very conscientious about their work ethic, is it the same thing? Is it the same trait? Is that what you're referring to?
Yes. Yeah. People who are, I mean, if you look at the characteristics, it's people who are on time, they're reliable, they're organized, they're structured in the way they do things. They stick to SOPs and procedures, without deviating. And so there were there were some funny questions in one of the assessments I use, which is, I leave a mess in my room. and conscientious people tend not to leave a mess in their room.
Okay.
It's one of the ways you can judge conscientiousness.
Yeah, I think pilots tend to be, they tend to be a little bit obsessive, I would say, and I don't like to use the words OCD, because it's always used now in the wrong sense. Yeah. But we do tend to be fairly obsessive people. My wife certainly says that I'm totally obsessive. When I'm given a task to do, I do it to the nth degree. And having now been in management for quite a while, you see it in others. And sometimes that's our downfall. Because and this is getting away now slightly. We're probably moving on to the other subject that we're maybe going to talk about in a moment about support, is that because we tend to be fairly obsessive people, we tend to get very stressed when we can't obsess about things, or when we obsess about things but they don't go in our direction. And that's really quite interesting. I know there was I don't know if you've ever seen it, there was a film, you will have seen it, I'm sure, but done by it was an American warrant officer. I forgot the name of the film now. I was shown it back in my Air Force days, and he had a nervous breakdown, and went off to study psychology as well. I think he was a helicopter pilot, and he then went around and did these long presentations to the Americans, and it eventually worked its way across to the Air Force and other armed services. But it was quite interesting what he said, and one of the things that made me laugh was he said he was basically asking questions of his audience. And he was saying, I bet when you shave in the morning, you always shave in exactly the same manner. You do that side, that stroke to the nth degree. But one thing he did really make me laugh was he said, when you say you're going on holiday, you'll tell the family that you're going to be in the car. The car will depart at 9:30 in the morning.
Yes.
So to you, that means that you will be ready in the car at 9:25.
Exactly.
Just to make sure that everything's going to go to plan and that you will depart at 9:30.
Yes.
And that is totally me. And over the 30 years of marriage, and my wife, if she ever listens to this, will now kill me. But she's totally the opposite. It doesn't really matter she leaves at 9:30, and it doesn't faze her or worry her at all. And over the years, I've had to learn to deal with that and not let it stress me. But initially, I remember when we were first married, especially when we first had children, it drove me spare, and it still does now. I just cannot abide being late for anything, and I'm always mortified if I'm late for anything, and that's part of our personality trait, and it's so true. And I think and we have to learn how to deal with that, because I think that's one of the things that we can really put ourselves down a hole with.
And it's quite an interesting one, because what you're talking about is the extremes of conscientiousness, where it does begin to phase into OCD. And people, that is where the sort of interface between what is an effective behavior for managing yourself becomes something which is an ineffective way of dealing with things. And that, you're at that sort of borderline. So there's quite a lot of research which says too much conscientiousness is as bad as too little.
Yeah.
And it shows up where, particularly in aviation, where people who are overly conscientious when things go wrong, what do? They go to the checklist, they go to the manuals, they search incessantly for the right piece of information to solve the problem. And there was a well-known accident, I think it was in Florida, where they ran out of fuel because they were spending so long to find the source of a warning light that had come on, that they missed the obvious stuff, which was
well known.
basically they didn't have enough fuel, and there was the accident. So I think you have to be careful with OCD because it is the extreme of that. It's one of the funny things that I've always noticed about assessing pilots is that pilots who are conscientious always turn up a half an hour at least before their appointment time. It became a standing joke in the place where I did a lot of assessments early that if they weren't there half an hour before, then it was highly likely that when I was assessing them, their score on conscientiousness wouldn't be very high. And certainly if they were late at all, they definitely were not conscientious, because most people, to avoid being late, have lots of fallback processes and procedures to make sure they're going to be somewhere on time.
Yeah, I still set 2 alarm clocks if I know I'm flying early in the morning.
Yep.
Can't help myself. Yep. Highly accurate. No more wind up ones that you couldn't rely on. But
yes.
I still do that because otherwise I won't sleep properly.
Yeah.
It's really good, and that it is fascinating, and it's a subject I could probably talk about all night, because you see it again and again, and it manifests itself in all walks of life. So you see it come out, and unfortunately, for not for all of us, but for some of us, that can be a real downfall, because in the wrong, it might be good in the right situation, but in the wrong situation, it's not healthy. Which leads me nicely into something that's not really it is. I suppose it's a relatively hot topic now, is pilot peer support. Which has come into UK legislation.
It has indeed,
And we've done, we between us all, we've done a fair amount of work on in recent years and months. Could you just tell us a little bit, Paul, about what pilot peer support means?
It originated, I think originally in the States, and then quite quickly into Europe, through a body called Stiftung Mayday, which is a German organization. And it's the notion that people can have recourse to talking with another pilot about issues where they can't have recourse to speaking to, say, a manager or particularly their AME. They can have a confidential conversation with somebody else, and a trained person will be able to listen to what the issues are and perhaps signpost them towards some sort of second level of help. And how most pilot peer support programs work is that there's a body of trained peer supporters who get a fair amount of training on how to provide support, but also on how to onward refer to specialists. People can contact them and have confidential conversations which don't go anywhere near management. One of the things in the regulation is that the support program has to be separate from any management contact, and has to be completely confidential. They don't even need to say their name, for example. They can just have a conversation with somebody. And the peer supporter who's been trained would then be able to do almost like a triage. They'll be able to say, I think you need to go and see. They may need to be signposted towards some other sort of support outside of aviation. Or if it's serious enough, they may be able to escalate it either to somebody like me or suggest that they go and talk to their AME. And occasionally they may also need to go to management and just get the time off duty because that's what they need. So it's a way of providing this confidential support. In many ways, what it does is make formal the informal contacts that people had anyway, where pilots would talk to pilots. I mean, a lot of long haul crews I talk to will tell you, we have these wonderful conversations while we're sitting over the Atlantic in the middle of the night when there's nothing much else to do. And it's amazing how much people open up and talk. And what that is peer support. It's just people talking about issues and being able to get things off their chest sometimes. But unfortunately,
sorry to interrupt. Do you think, obviously we're a kind of very male-dominated industry. There's no getting away from that. And on the previous podcasts, we've spoken about that, how we're trying to change that in the industry. But at the moment, that is a fact. And blokes are just not very good at coming forward and talking about their problems, or if even if they just don't feel right, we're not very good at it. Do you think that actually making peer support, I know it's regulation, but as you said, sitting on the flight deck chatting to each other, but actually making it actually a regulation, an accepted process, encourages people even outside of that process to be more open?
I think the evidence is that is the case. People become a lot more at ease talking about issues. I think it is a particular thing with pilots, and I think that's because almost of the self-image that pilots develop of themselves, of control. And it's almost like we were talking about in the conscientiousness of, I am in control of this machine. I need to be the person in control of all of this, because of the people in the back are relying on me to get them where they want to go safely. So I think that then goes over into the emotional part and the personal life as well, in terms of I need to be in control. And quite a lot of the pilots I get referred and I see will often mention this. They would say things like, I was in a situation over which I had no control. And that's when I went to pieces, because I realized I couldn't control it the way I normally would. And it's when people realize that there are some things in life that you just cannot control, you just have to go with it, that they then start a treatment process. But I think it is specific with pilots. My own concern, which I've raised quite a few times, is that I think there is also a big issue with engineers, aerospace engineers, who are also unlikely to be the people who will talk about feelings a great deal, because that's why they do the job they do. They're not in social work. They're in dealing with heavy stuff late at night in dark hangars and, in the cold. And I think there is a particular issue there which has not been addressed so far.
Yeah, we've moved, aircrew wise, we've moved on leaps and bounds over, certainly how long have I been flying? Probably 37 years. In terms of crew resource management, the peer support programs that's coming in, we refresh every year. If we join a new company, you have 2 days of crew resource management. We talk about it all the time from a management point of view. We're always referring to it, every month at a flight ops safety meeting. It's referred to. So it's a core skill that we want people to have and to be open. But you're absolutely right. The engineers, they do human factors, but it's not taken anywhere near as seriously, which is peculiar when you think about it, because they're just as critical as the aircrew.
Absolutely. And I always say that there's a bigger risk to aircraft safety from an engineer with mental health and well-being issues as a pilot. It only needs somebody to forget to latch something up, or it only needs somebody to not talk something up the right degree. There's lots of ways in which people who are distracted and their head is somewhere else will perform unsafe acts the same way.
And I think the pilot. Distraction is the key there as well. We talk about distraction in a different sense, but when an engineer's in the workplace, there's so many opportunities for distraction, particularly these days. I always still shudder a little bit if I see someone next to an aircraft on their mobile phone. Now they could be looking at a manual or something like that, but again, there are so many avenues. Once we're in the cockpit, it's a lot easier for us because it's contained. We have rules, regulations. You shouldn't be looking at your mobile phone, blah blah blah. And there's less, and there's not a queue of people who want to say, there's a delivery arrived, or have you seen this, or
Yep.
and so I see that all the time, and I always, it's a little bit like pilots doing pre-flights. I always think, it's almost sacrosanct. You shouldn't go near them.
Yes.
And I always make a point
Yeah.
now, if I see an engineer in an aircraft and I want to speak to him, I wait and watch, and then if attention comes my way, then I say, are you okay to speak, or are you inside something? And I think distraction is a major, but distraction comes in all forms as well, because you can, as you know, you just can distract yourself. So,
and that's one of the reasons why the peer support program, because it is to remove a source of distraction from external pressures, external anxieties, financial pressures, and all sorts of things. So, in a sense, it allows that safety net. It is a bit strange though, because there's a number of big sort of paradoxes in peer support. Who is audited by the CAA and EASA or any other regulator? It's the operator. But the operator isn't responsible for the peer support program, because it has to be independent and totally confidential. So there's a sort of an anomaly there. It's also, I think, very much biased towards large fixed wing operators. And if you take the BAs of this world, pilots pitch up there to fly a few sectors with somebody they've maybe never met in their life before. They may have flown with them 10 years ago. And I've evidenced these conversations of arriving and hearing two pilots, saying, well, I haven't seen you for 10 years. How are you getting on these days? They don't know each other. So they don't have the natural support. And I always say with operations like rotary wing operators, people know each other. They fly together regularly, and so they can pick up some of the subtle cues that something's not right with somebody. They don't need a peer support program to do that. All they need is just to be able to say, you don't look yourself today. What's troubling you? So I think peer support is a bit of there's a few paradoxes in providing it. Great idea. I hope at one stage it will disappear, and it will disappear because people will be confident to talk to colleagues that way and to open up, but also they'll be confident to talk to management.
Yeah.
And another reason why peer support is there is because in many operators, the last person you talk to about a mental well-being issue is your manager. There are some that are really good at it, and there are some that you really do not want to go there.
And that's a real shame, and that kind of harks back to the whole just culture, safety culture in the company. And you're absolutely right. I think it's probably a lot better than it was. I think I've said this in virtually every podcast, actually. But this, even when we've been talking about different subjects, the way the industry has changed so much that even in the management structures, it has got a lot better, and there are significantly different personalities, even to when I left the Air Force. So that's good. But you're absolutely right. There shouldn't really be a need for it. We should all be happy to speak up, and not continuously, but when we genuinely are feeling that way, that we should be able to speak up. And I wonder as well, is we moved away from that kind of crew room ethos as well. I know the airlines, I think the airlines did have it because they spent a lot more time down route, but these days, they, because of the operation, because of the FTL, they quite often can turn around and come back, the short to medium haul guys, so they don't have that time in a hotel with the crew and socialise. And the same for us, we don't have that time in a crew room anymore. Whereas when I started flying, a lot of your time was taken sat in the crew room, listening to people and also speaking and talking. And quite often that was a good way for people to subtly get their feelings out there.
I think it's the normal way of doing things. It's the informal approach. People who've got mates, but the particular group I think that really do need peer support are younger pilots who perhaps have joined an organization, don't know many people, they've possibly moved to an area or even a country they don't know, and so they're often quite isolated and lonely. And I think that's a group that really do benefit from peer support. Having said that, my experience of peer support programs, and there's a few I support, is that the most people that use it tend to be older pilots rather than the younger pilots, which is a very interesting sort of take on it. And particularly now, there's been a big increase because of scheduled airlines starting to ramp up operations again. There's been quite a few examples of older pilots feelings or understanding they've got skill fade. They are then anxious about being able to get back into the job because they don't think they're able to perform the way they used to, because in some cases they haven't touched an aircraft for 2 years.
I was going to ask about that. Have you seen any changes because of the pandemic?
Yep.
Again, our industry, my industry, we carried on. So
exactly.
There has been lots of that has caused different stresses and different issues, but it hasn't caused the one where you've had to have a gap of 2 years and then come back. What have you seen, Paul, in return to airline flying?
I think people have come back actually in quite a different place because there's been a lot of anxiety, particularly in the younger pilot group, because flying is money. Quite often they've got a big debt they need to service. That's not been possible. There's been various ways in which some airlines have been very good at supporting people and others haven't. So I think with all of that, there's also the whole question of currency, people feeling that their skills have faded. There's also a lack of motivation sometimes. People saying, I don't know why I need to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning for a 5 o'clock report. I actually have had a great time. I can stay in my bed till 10. Do I really want to go back to this? So I've come across quite a few who've left the industry because they've done other things and have then decided that the type of life that they had, even long haul, where you're away for days on a time, if you've got a young family, you're not going to see them. So people have just lost a lot of motivation. It's actually, funnily enough, I was talking about this yesterday when I was down in Stansted. It's a bigger issue for cabin crew because cabin crew don't have the same investment in the job as pilots do. And many cabin crew have said, sod that, I'm not going to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning anymore to fly 200 drunken people to Alicante. I've got better things to do with my life. So there's
I think when you're on the hamster wheel, it's sometimes you're away and there's no chance to reflect. And again, there's some bit of a repetitiveness in these podcasts because I've said this a couple of times as well. Is that this 2 years for some people has given them again, and I've said this twice now, is that it gives people a chance to reflect. And sometimes, as you say, you think when you're actually doing it and in it every day, you don't have a chance to reflect, and it's just normal life. It's normal life to feel fairly kind of stressed by getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, landing at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you notice it, but you don't have time to reflect on it. And I think some people have seen this, and it's not just aviation. I think a lot of people have looked at life, and particularly with everything that else has happened and is going on in the world, people have looked back and think, well, do you know what? I'm not sure I actually really want to do this. And it's that chance to reflect. Which has made the difference. And it's very interesting. And the cabin crew point, I totally get that. I can see, you're not invested in it. You're not high salaried, so you're probably not likely to have massive mortgages like that some particularly pilots might get themselves into because of their earning potential. And you can just say, actually, no, I'm not doing this. I'm sure I'm sure some people absolutely love that job, but you can see just by flying on a commercial basis that at times it must be fairly horrible to be there.
And I think as well with that particularly the cabin crew have been able to go off and get other jobs fairly easily.
Transferable skills
for pilots that although many have gone on and done things like driving for Amazon and supermarkets, and I came across one the other day who'd gone off and got an HGV license, and
Yeah.
saying, in some ways, he said this is more fun, driving a sort of an articulated lorry than flying a
the
737.
The Amazon driver theme has been a theme of the podcast as well. I think there should probably be a peer support program for Amazon drivers.
Oh boy, yeah.
Because again, they've had no respite, and the pressures that these guys and girls are under is immense, absolutely immense. I mean, I'm joking, I'm making light of it, but you can see. I mean, and when you stand and chat and get a moment when they've not got to make the next drop, but they're under massive pressure to make the drops on time, and it's all relative, isn't it? We look at our little worlds and go, "Oh, that's a bit stressful," or I've put myself under a lot of pressure because I've got off the ground 30 minutes late, and but then you look at some of these other jobs, way outside of healthcare and all these things, but like I think delivery driving. It must be massively stressful, particularly I think if you put a pilot in it, because he's going to be going, I'd be going nuts that I would be going late.
Well, remember also airspace is regulated.
Yeah.
But the road space isn't.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it may only be 2D as opposed to 3D, but
it's it's got a lot more hazards, I think, than you get. But to counter that, I think there's another side of it and a lot of I've been assessing a lot of pilots for a new startup operation, and most of them have been either made redundant from through the COVID situation, or have been on long-term furlough and so on as a result of it. And most of them are absolutely desperate to get back to flying in a way that you don't see, and I think in other professions, that people just really want to go back and do the job. I think there's an overwhelming sort of desire that they just want to get back and do the thing that gives them their own personal identity, which is to put the uniform on, to pitch up at an awful hours of the morning, wearing their uniform. But actually, that's what gives them
people
as individual.
People complain and moan, but we all did it for a reason, and most of us did it the reason because we absolutely are in love with aviation.
Yeah,
you can grow out of that. I haven't. I've grown out of love of certain bits of aviation, but I still, of a weekend, I go and fly a plane because I was still like a little kid. That's another pilot trait. I think you can. What is it they say? You can either. What do you want to do when you grow up? Well, it's one or the other. But I still get it. I still get that thrill flying for me, light aircraft every time I get off the ground and every time I land.
I think there is something about aviation as well. I think as a sort of concept, because people say to me, "Why do you do what you do?" And I say, "Well, I actually love it because I would not do this if I didn't like it." But actually, I like it because of the interesting area it is. There's a sort of there's something different about it as a sort of an area. And I've in my previous sort of consultancy roles as a psychologist worked in different sectors like oil and gas and retail, finance, but none of them have got quite the attraction, I think, of aviation, of being and also the interest that I find in it. Because people often ask me, how do you manage to keep going only working in one sector? I said, well, I really wouldn't want to work anywhere else. The other thing I think that keeps me motivated is that I do believe that psychology and psychologists are valued in aviation because of this link with things like CRM, stress, fatigue, even down to cockpit design, the ergonomic side of it. I feel professionally valued in aviation in a way I didn't feel in some of these other areas where people would say, "Oh, here comes the trick cyclist again," and would just roll their eyes. Whereas I've never had any of that in aviation. People have always been interested. They've always been sort of responsive to things that I've been involved with as well.
Yeah, I think we see it as a big positive now. You mentioned like psychiatry. Back in the day, if you were referred to a psychiatrist in the aviation world, it was pretty much the end. And as I think you've got some good stats, I think now, if you are referred, certainly in the UK, there's a very good chance that you will get your license back. Is it way into the 90%? Is that, Paul?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's 90% or more. The people who don't have usually got diagnosable conditions that really they shouldn't have been in the cockpit in the first place, to be honest.
Just going back to the peer support for a moment. What is the? I mean, it's quite new in our world. Obviously, people like BA and some of the other airlines have been doing it for a while. What is the take-up rate? In terms of use of the service.
2.5.
2.5%.
Absolutely is standard. Everywhere you look, it went down during the pandemic, but that's what you expect. It's gone up slightly since that's happened. The major one that I'm involved with, which is a scheduled seasonal operator, they are a fixed wing. We're getting quite an increase there, but that's because they're ramping up activities. But it's still not really quite back to 2.5% of all pilots. So it's another one of these paradoxes. You've got quite a sort of a fairly regulated issue for a relatively small number of pilots. And I always say 90% of pilots are absolutely perfectly fine. The only thing they need is perhaps some awareness of mental health and well-being. And that to me is done through CRM. Or it should be done through CRM, and it should be a regular part of recovery. The same way that stress and fatigue are covered, physical and mental well-being should be part of that too. And also just flagging up that people need to be self-aware, because that's the key to it, that people realize, it says on the back of the license, you need to be in a fit state to operate. And if you're not, then it's your responsibility to do something about it.
Yeah, I think that has hit the nail on the head, as you say, the actual self-awareness side, but also that gives you awareness of other people. I think that's something we've probably not been great at. He'll be all right. He's fine. He's just, he's just this, or she's just that. And that is probably more valuable, as you said, than actually talking to a peer in some respects. I think that general awareness that it's almost becoming a cliche, but it is okay not to be okay.
Sure.
And that to me is a significant change.
Yeah.
Even in the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 years.
Yes.
It's okay. I always say to people, it's difficult to pin down. If you break your leg, it's obvious. You've got a broken leg, you can't fly. Well, if you're having a mental well-being or mental health issue, it's just the same. You are still ill. Maybe not clinically ill, but you are still ill. You're not well, and therefore you shouldn't be flying. And it's hard still to get people to equate the two, because you can't see it.
Yes.
If you can see someone's leg in plaster, it's easy.
Yes.
You physically can't get in the aircraft. That's easy. It's the other bit that's hidden. And I'm certainly more aware of it, and I've certainly been through myself, some pretty stressful, deep, dark times. And I'm more happy now to talk about stuff that's happened to me. And I hear it coming out from lots of other people as well. In fact, I was listening to a podcast the other day, Flight Deck Wingman, who's got an excellent podcast, and he was interviewing an aspiring Instagram captain, Chris, I think he's called, star, and both of them mention points in their career and recently where, even to a point of exhaustion, not so much mental well-being, but it is mental well-being, not so much mental health, but just realizing that you're exhausted, and it may be exhausted not because of your job, but just because of life. But that's going to manifest itself probably pretty horribly sometimes in the cockpit. 99 times out of 10, 100 no to crew. But it's when everything adds up, when then all the holes align, that's when it comes out. Now it's really interesting, and that rate of 2.5%, even as across like someone like BA, it probably is a reasonable amount of pilots as you say, for rotary operators and for small fixed wing operators, it's going to be a tiny number. We're talking one or two people a year that might have to use service, and it might not be for something. You're hoping that with this peer support program, that it doesn't even go near you. That matter has been spoken about, and happily the pilot might go away saying, "That's put that into perspective for me."
Yes. Where it works well, that's exactly what happens. Exactly that.
Yeah.
I do have a concern about people who only fly single crew, because they can be a little bit more vulnerable, and I suppose even when you get into the field of sort of PPL holders and so on, that there's still a lesson there, because we know what the accident rate is like in commercial aviation.
General aviation, there's no one regulating you in that sense.
Yeah.
So you can jump into, because it's one of the things that I love, and so I'm surrounded by private pilots whenever I'm flying for fun, and the awareness and the risk perspective people have is totally different, and it's something that actually I'd like to talk. I have spoken about, and in threat and error management particularly for private pilots. But it does bleed over the fact that and we've seen it. I mean, there has been accidents where the authority has picked up, or the AIB has picked up, that someone's life wasn't going in the right direction, and they're massively distracted. And you are still flying, and you are still flying sometimes on your own. Well, generally on your own, or as the only pilot. You probably might have passengers with you. You are flying an aircraft which takes a lot more flying than what we do on a day-to-day basis, because we're assisted by all kinds of things, and you're not so well provided for, and so in some respects it can, and you're not generally as well trained or as current, so that can all add up, and you add on top of that someone who's distracted by something else that's happened, and it can be something quite simple, just like a car accident or something like that. And you see it, and you can see people when they go flying, they drag and of course, if it's your hobby, what do you do when you're stressed? you go, it's your hobby. So relaxation is to go and drag the airplane out the hangar and go flying. Of course, part of flying is the challenge and the slight element of risk. So it's not like going fishing or something like that. It's not the ideal relaxation. It's something I could talk about for hours, because it's something that fascinates me. I think the commercial world is never going to be perfect, but it's very well covered.
And I did some presentations a few years back on pressure to fly, and part of that was people creating their own internal pressure, because they only had a couple of hours on a Saturday afternoon, and they maybe didn't feel great, but that's what they were going to do. And the weather wasn't maybe as good as they hoped, but hey, I do need to go and do it. And people getting into decision making that's faulty. And there were quite a lot of examples I used to give in that presentation about what had happened as a result of that. And part of it was actually aimed not so much at the general aviation, but it was aimed at the rotary wing, particularly single crew operations, and particularly things like HEMS, where there is an incredible pressure to complete the mission, because they know the people in the back have got to get to hospital. And you can read the accident stats on HEMS operations. Pilots making that decision ostensibly for the right reason, but actually the wrong reason. And they create internal pressure to fly. But I must admit, one of the reasons that I don't fly is because I am aware I have extremely poor eye-hand coordination. And I thought
you were trying. Did you not have a go? I thought you had.
And an R22. Yes, yeah. Up at the back of Peter Coulter, and I do remember the look on the face of the guy who was up with me when we came back now. And I realized myself, I really am not going to make a success of this. It's really not going to work for me. So I just haven't gone there. And then I had an eyesight problem, which is done now. I've got the eyesight, but I still don't have the coordination. Certainly not for not for a rotary wing operator. I might be okay with fixed wing. I don't know. But I can see the attraction. I see why people want to do it, and then create perhaps even the internal pressure on themselves to just go out and do something that when they really shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah, and that you also see people like in the commercial world where they probably should have given up. They should have given up ages ago. But you put that, but in, like you said, pilots want to come back to flying in the commercial world because it is who they are. And you do get a little bit of that in the general aviation leisure flying as well. It becomes to some people who they are, and that's I don't know, that's John, and John's got his own airplane, and John flies everywhere for business and stuff like that. And you do see some people, and you can see some people that scare the living daylights out of themselves, and yet continue.
Yes.
And the world of social media now has made that even more obvious. I follow lots of Facebook groups and stuff, and people, it's great. People put their mistakes on, and that's fantastic for other people to learn from. But quite often you see mistakes being made by the same person again, and again. And you think to yourself, why have you not stopped? Why is this is no longer the right thing to do? This cannot be fun. This is not fun unless you've got some kind of psychological disorder where that's enjoyment, or there's the vain hope that one day you'll get it absolutely right.
And you know where the end of that's going to be. You can see with people like that, their likelihood is that they're going to have one too many one day. One too many incidents.
No, really interesting, and it's been fascinating, Paul. And there's so much more we could talk about. I know that. I'm watching the clock here a little bit. We've actually been talking for an hour already, which is fantastic. And I've only just noticed. I like to round these things up. By the way, for everybody, Paul, obviously your business, Core Aviation Psychology, which I'm sure if you want to find out more, or you want to even speak to Paul about something, you'll find them on the web, and we'll put it in the show notes as well.
I pick up quite a few people just contact me and spec. I think going back to what we were saying a minute ago, one of the things I've noticed a big increase of are pilots taking action on their own and not going to the AME, but actually just calling me and say, look, can I just have a discussion with you? And I'm quite happy to do that. I take referrals also from AMEs quite often, particularly for people who want to get a PPL who've got any history of a psychiatric or psychological treatment. Then I can provide the report for people. I do a lot of that.
Yeah. Well, we'll put some links in the show notes for that. I asked one question. Now I'm making this a tradition, and you can answer this in any which way you like. It doesn't have to be to do with aviation. It doesn't have to be to do with anything in particular. But what do you think the world will look like to, I say Paul Dickens in 5 years' time?
Ooh, yeah. I would have had a view on that until recent events. There's a sort of 10% of me thinks that we may not be here. I'm pretty sure we will. Yeah. I'm pretty sure we will be. I do think that the world it'll settle again in some way or other. Not well for some people, obviously, but I think things will sort of. I think even the aviation industry, I think, is beginning to start to pick up again from the pandemic issue. I think it will be different in the sense that the whole pandemic has changed people's perceptions of what they want from life. That people want something that's more fulfilling. People have enjoyed the ways of working they've had. I've noticed a big increase in commercial airlines beginning to offer part-time contracts so that people can do other things, or that they just don't have to spend, their sort of committed life doing the one thing. They can go off and do other things. And quite often I'm coming across pilots who are, 50% of their time in aviation, 50% doing something totally different. I think the world's going to be a bit more flexible in that sense, particularly the world of work in 5 years' time. And I think also we'll see all this the rise of automation. I think we'll still have two people in the cockpit in commercial airlines for quite some time. I don't think we'll be flying on drones for a bit, but you never know, that might change.
Yeah, and the whole eVTOL world will open up a whole new, different kind of strain of pilots as well.
Yes.
Which if and when it happens, and again, it's something I can speak about for hours, is that these pilots will be very different to the stick and rudder pilots.
Yes.
Well, it's changing already, but we are still stick and rudder pilots.
Yes.
These pilots will be pilots, but not in the true sense of the word. And that could possibly throw up all kinds of different issues, I would imagine. But maybe 5 years time, we'll come back and speak about it again.
I'll be retired.
So will I, but we can still speak about it again, Paul.
Yeah, for sure. But it's an interesting one because, I mean, if you follow what's happening in Ukraine, a lot of the damage being done to Russian forces is by people with laptops operating drones, and they're sitting in all sorts of other places. And if we ever had the time, there's a whole field of aviation psychology, which is looking at the psychology behind people who pilot UAVs, which is that's fascinating area.
Well, let's make a date on that. That's been brilliant, Paul. I would actually really like to do that. It's something I know absolutely nothing about, so it'd be fascinating to get you back and have a chat about that. Yeah. But really, so thank you so much for being on. I've really, really enjoyed it. And I'm sure that people will learn a lot and enjoy this as well. It's been great to chat with you. Take care, Paul.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, Ed. Cheers.
A big thank you to Paul from Core Aviation Psychology. What has been a fascinating insight into the whole subject of mental health and well-being, not only for pilots, but the whole of the aviation industry. You can find Paul's website by visiting the show notes in your favourite podcast app. And while you're there, why not take a moment to subscribe to the Busy Aviation podcast channel? If you or your business would like to appear on the Busy Aviation podcast, please get in contact via our website at www.busyaviation.co.uk. And if you need an online strategy or content or anything else for your aviation online presence, please get in contact. I really look forward to being of help. Thanks for listening and fly safely.